Chapter 2, Day 0. The man in the dusty robe paused after cresting the top of the hill just outside town. The paved road petered out halfway up the slope, turning into nothing more than a well-worn dirt path. The monastery had little cause for visitors, and the monks had other concerns than completing a simple road. The sun rose behind the travel-worn man, stretching his hooded shadow almost to the monastery door over 30 meters away. He didn't pay any notice. There was critical work to be done. The pain in his left leg fought his desire to continue, though he limped through it now, as his first goal was in sight. He'd gotten used to the sensation of his trousers sticking to his wound via dried blood. The stranger approached the gates, always left open in case a weary traveller required succour. That worked in his favour. He stopped a few steps down from the entrance to gather his mind for the task ahead. There would be neither room for error nor a second attempt. While he gathered his will, a solitary monk exited the open gates with a large basket in tow. He was probably heading to the orchard behind the grounds. The monk took his surprise in stride. "Good morning, traveller. Might I assist you?" The man in the dusty robe lowered his hood and flashed a wan smile. A burn scar crept from under the robe to tickle his neck just under his ear. He spoke in a firm voice. "Would you mind telling me if the Archimandrite has arrived yet?" The monk relaxed. "You know of his coming, brother?" The traveller simply nodded. "Then you should head inside. The Archimandrite arrived in the late evening and should be preparing for the breakfast of fast." The man in the dusty robe stepped closer, dropping a slender blade into his palm, unnoticed by the monk. The blade embedded in the monk's jugular as the traveller replied, "Thank you for the information. It was most helpful. Rest well, my brother." The monk's eyes pleaded for aid as the stranger pushed him to the dirt, blood spilling around the clasped wound. The traveller's deft hand ensured no screams could issue from the monk, while blood seeped into the well-trodden path. He stepped over his victim with as much thought as avoiding a cowpat, and stood in the monastery entrance. A few monks were scattered inside. None had seen him or his actions as yet. That was good. He didn't want his target warned beforehand. The traveller closed his eyes, gathering strands of heat around his torso like he was winding cotton onto a spool. Even the rising sun seemed to dim as the energy mounted. His radiance drew a curious attention of the few monks in the courtyard as he took a single step forward. The stranger's eyes flashed open so suddenly that those that witnessed it would have sworn his eyes burst through the eyelids instead of blinking open. That was assuming they survived to tell their tale. In the same moment, the gathered energy spewed forth in a solid torrent of amber and magenta flame, aimed directly at the main building. The air around it crackled as fireballs the size of a horse juked at random, crashing into other buildings and the frightened monks. Within the time it took to sever the first monk's throat, the bluestone compound had begun to melt. Several formerly dedicated monks broke their vow of silence to utter panicked screams as the flames engulfed them. Once the conflagration reached the outer wall, the man in the dusty robe stepped backwards, but kept the assault going. His onslaught ceased when an explosion cracked the very hill down the middle, tossing the traveller onto his ass. Gathering his feet, the now mass murderer stared at the vibrant scarlet beam as it burst into the heavens, setting the clouds afire as the energy spread. The flames at its base formed into a titanic clawed hand that reached up, swirling around the beam and beyond the clouds. The region glowed blood red as the sky burned for several miles overhead. The traveller reached both hands into the air, siphoning a small amount of the released energy into himself. He saw it as his birthright after all. The energy snaked down his arms and into his damaged left leg. The pain there disappeared in an instant. While he took a little more energy for himself, he watched the flames just in case. He was certain the Archimandrite had fallen. If he hadn't, the emergence pillar wouldn't have birthed. However, one can't be too careful when dealing with his ilk. Ash, fire, and sulphur plummeted from the clouds as the flaming claw broke away from the ground, dissolving itself into the sky. The single pillar of light lingered for several moments before finally ceasing. Several homes and farms may be set ablaze, but that was the price of his important work. The people will see that once his tasks are ended, or die in their short-sightedness. While the fire raged, the traveller turned away from the moderately sized town to continue his journey.